Welcome, dungeon hackers. In today's video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about an experience that we had in an adventure that we ran. In a previous video, which I will link in the comments below, I talked about how to use a storm in your adventure. Well, it seemed like such a good idea that the next time we played, I had a storm adventure prepared for my players. And I'm going to let you know how it went, because I think it went pretty good. In that video, I talked about how not only can a storm adventure take place during the storm, but also before the storm arrives and after the storm is over. So I incorporated a little bit of all of this into the adventure. First, a brief background of the campaign that my players are running. Early in their adventuring career, they discovered an obelisk with some sort of magical properties. However, they were unable to determine what they were or how they worked, and they couldn't understand any of the runes on them. However, there was a library hidden in a cave behind it. So currently there are a ton of librarians and scribes copying information and doing research in this library. So around this obelisk, a small settlement has set up, and that includes things like blacksmith and a general store, and of course a tavern, along with other basic necessities for the people that live and work in the library. Before the adventure began, the druid in the party had a premonition that the oncoming storm was more than just a normal storm. And as the storm was approaching the village, they had 1 hour to prepare for it. So I gave the players a list of options that each player could pick one thing from to do. Each of these options had several skill checks associated with them, and whichever player chose each option would perform that skill check. If they were successful in their skill check, then whatever option they chose has been prepared for the storm. If they fail their skill check, then the location is not properly secured, and there are some immediate and long-term consequences to their failure. Any options on the list that they didn't choose are automatically subject to immediate and long-term consequences as well. I have 5 players in my group, so I chose 8 different locations that they could try to prepare for the storm. And these were those locations. They could evacuate the low-lying homes. They could gather and distribute essential supplies. They could reinforce the magical library. They could protect the obelisk. They could clear debris and unstable structures that are still under construction. They could secure the livestock and farm animals. They could secure the tavern, or they could secure the blacksmith. Each player chose different things based on their character's backstory and the kinds of things that their character is interested in. Up first was Chance, our party's bard. He chose to evacuate the low-lying homes in order to protect the people that lived there from any potential flooding. He was successful in his attempt, and as such, there was no immediate danger from that location. Next was the gathering and distribution of essential supplies, and nobody chose to handle that situation, so there were some short-term consequences. Next, Edit, our paladin, chose to reinforce the magical library, as that is something that is near and dear to her character's heart. She was also successful, so there was no bad consequences associated with the magical library. Next, our second paladin, Mira, failed to secure the obelisk. This caused some wild surges of magical energy as the storm approached. Nobody attempted to clear the debris or secure any of the buildings that were under construction. Mossbeard, our druid, failed to secure the livestock and the farm animals. Thunk, our party's fighter, failed to secure the tavern, and no one attempted to secure the blacksmith's smithy. So what were the short-term consequences for each of these actions? And I did have consequences associated with each one, so that whether the party succeeded or failed, or whether they didn't do anything with that option at all, I would have potential consequences ready to go. When the bard evacuated the low-lying houses, had he failed, there would have been a lot of people down there, along with a lot of flooding that was going to bring in giant frogs, and that would have been a combat encounter for the party, fighting off the giant frogs and rescuing the farmers that were living down there. No one attempted to gather or distribute essential supplies, and the short-term consequence for this resulted in a skill challenge as the townsfolk were trying to raid the general store to get the supplies that they needed. The party was able to successfully calm the mob of people that were trying to get stuff as the storm was raging on and get them into safe, secure locations. However, there are still long-term consequences that we'll talk about a little bit later in the video based on them ignoring this situation. Had the Paladin been unable to secure the magical library, it would have been a puzzle challenge to help protect the lower shelves that were holding valuable books and scrolls while water was rushing in. It would have been a time-based challenge, and they would have only had a certain amount of rounds in order to solve the puzzle. However, that was avoided along with any long-term consequences thanks to the successful check of Edit the Paladin. Since Mira failed the check to secure the obelisk, this led to a combat encounter with a couple of air elementals and a couple of dust mephits. I flavored the dust mephits to simply be tiny little storm elementals, and since there's a storm raging on during all of this, only one of the air elementals was obvious when the combat began. So the other two little dust mephits, as well as the secondary elemental, became visible after combat began and the party had run into the encounter, thus causing the backline party members, the druid and the bard, to have some dust mephits in their face and be unable to assist the melee combatants with the two air elementals. Next was them not clearing the debris and fortifying the buildings under construction, and this caused the party to have another skill challenge or obstacle as they had to remove the debris to get to other locations within the town, as the storm was blowing over structures as well as blowing the debris around, causing damage to things. The consequences of the druid failing to secure all the animals in time led to the horses in town running amok throughout the stables. He was able to secure a few of them, however the ones that were running around in the stable yard attracted several lightning wolves that the party then had to fight while trying to protect the horses. However, the horses were in a panic mode and were continually trampling the party as they ran around trying to stay away from the wolves and out of the storm. The fighters' failure to secure the tavern led to a battle with a couple of water elementals. However, the two water elementals were actually broken casks of ale that were possessed by elemental spirits to create water elementals, much to the consternation of the fighter that really likes his ale. This wasn't a super difficult combat for them. However, the water elementals were strong enough that they were able to do some pretty good damage and use up several of the party's resources. Finally, we get to the blacksmith, where nobody secured in the first place, and thus the fire elementals came out of the forge and destroyed the smithy. When the party came to fight them, it seemed that the fire elementals were much more powerful than the water elementals. I didn't alter either of them. They just seemed to do way more damage than the water elementals did, and they didn't have any additional disadvantages to them. I found that kind of curious. However, I had included an extra fire elemental to make this particular battle a little more challenging as we were getting towards the end of the adventure. In the process, I watered down the fire elementals a little bit thanks to the rain, so they weren't doing quite as much damage, because with 3 fire elementals, their auras alone were causing a lot of damage to the party. Finally, as the center of the storm approached, I had the party fight a Merid, which is a form of genie associated with water. I flavored it simply as an embodiment of the storm, so it didn't really look like an actual Merid. However, it was an excellent battle and a lot of fun, and the Merid was able to do a lot of things by creating a fog cloud and fighting the party within the fog cloud where they couldn't see, but its blind side allowed it to have no difficulties whatsoever. Once they defeated the Merid, the storm dissipated all on its own, as if by magic, just like it formed. So now I mentioned that there were some long-term consequences to this as well. So anything that they managed to secure, they won't have any long-term consequences. However, the things that they didn't secure give us a bunch of long-term consequences that we can use as plot hooks for future adventures. For example, they failed to secure the general store while gathering and distributing supplies. This is going to lead to widespread illness, and the town will suffer a prolonged period of illness due to medicine being destroyed in the storm. This is going to be a large-scale Find a Cure quest that will have a very specific time component to it because people are sick and dying, and so they don't have a whole lot of time. It's always important to find ways to put some clocks on at least some of your adventures, because if the adventure doesn't have a clock, they can just do one fight, take a long rest, do a fight, take a long rest, and use all of their resources every single time. Now that can be fine, and if that's the way you want to run your adventures, there's nothing wrong with that. I like for my players to have meaningful decisions to make on when and how they use their resources, and so I like for them to have several fights within a day. The next has to do with the magical obelisk that wasn't properly secured. In order to secure the obelisk, it's going to require another fetch quest where the party has to gather a magical tome with information about the obelisk, which they're researching anyway, so they will find out that there's a tome about it somewhere and they'll have to go and get it. Then they will also need to find an artifact powerful enough to affect the obelisk. Both of these combined should lead to a couple of new adventures for the players. Their failure to clear the debris and secure the new construction means that several buildings that were being built are going to take a lot longer to be finished. This is going to put a huge strain on the resources, meaning that if the party needs help from some people in the future, they may not be able to get it right away because those people are too busy to go out and gather the resources the party might need because they're too busy trying to rebuild the structures that got destroyed in the storm. Because the livestock wasn't secured, the town's horses have been scattered into the wilderness. Now, a lot of the construction is going to require the horses in order to move a lot of the heavy materials, lumber and stone and things like that around. So the party's going to need to go and find all the horses. Each horse that they find can be an encounter in and of itself, whether it is a social encounter to convince somebody to give back the horse they found, or a combat encounter to rescue the horse from the owlbear attacking it, or perhaps even a skill check or puzzle type challenge to get the horse out of the flooded waters. The consequences for the tavern being destroyed by the ale elementals is that the owner of the tavern just doesn't want to go with the trouble of rebuilding it. They're older and just want to go somewhere and retire. So they're going to go live with their kids in the city. Meanwhile, the new person that is going to open a tavern doesn't have a relationship with the party and isn't very nice and doesn't like them very much, thanks to some stuff that happened earlier in the campaign. So the new tavern won't be nearly as welcoming to them. They'll get no free food, no free ale, no free lodging, and any information that they want is going to cost them, as opposed to normally when they would be able to get information for free, thanks to some help they gave the previous tavern owner. And finally, the blacksmith. The blacksmith's smithy was destroyed by the fire elementals, and in order to get it back up and running properly, he's going to need the help of an artificer to help construct a new anvil and billows. If they want the blacksmith to make anything more than mundane items, they're also going to need several rare materials as well. So yet another fetch quest for our players to go on. So as you can see, simply using this storm adventure did a lot of different things for us. Not only did the party enjoy the adventure very much from what I've been told, but it gave the players a lot of agency of their own to decide what they were going to do and what they were going to protect. It helps build onto their characters' backstory, as well as shape how their characters are changing throughout the campaign. Then the adventure was entertaining and fun for everybody, and we have a half dozen new plot hooks that we can use to send the party on additional adventures in the future. Now I don't have to come up with a new idea for every session. I've already got some ready to go, built right into the storm adventure. So again, check out a link in the video description below where I talk about how to use storms in your campaign. Like and subscribe and check out some other videos of mine so that you'll understand how you can hack the dungeon.